Hi, everyone. Like she said, my name's Katie. It's Katie Gimple. I'm with the Department of Children and Families. Right now I'm covering a few counties, and Osceola is one of them. I just kind of wanted to go over with you guys tonight a little bit about what DCF does. If you observe any kind of abuse or neglect, how to report it, what happens after it's reported, and then the specific things that we do investigate when we're investigating. With this kind of just to start it off, these are a couple technical things. For us to receive a report, it has to be on someone who's under 18. We also, with DCF, do take reports on elderly. Just know that, on vulnerable adults. I'm not going to go into that, but just know that it's possible. The child has to be located in Florida or have an expected return date. If they're not here, there's not much we can do for them. That they have been harmed or believe that there's a threat of harm, and it has to be from a person that's responsible for their care. On occasion, we'll receive reports on a neighbor. If that neighbor was not a caregiver to the child, if they were at a gathering and their parents were there, then we won't really do anything with that. We will turn it over to law enforcement so that they can investigate, though. So we investigate three things with DCF. We do abuse, abandonment, and neglect. Abuse is any willful or threatened act or omission that results in any physical, mental, or sexual injury or harm that causes or is likely to cause the child's physical, mental, or emotional health to be significantly impaired. Abuse can be a result of omission. If there's an instance where someone abuses a child and someone else knows about it in the home and they take no action, they omit to do anything, then they can be responsible, just as responsible for the abuse as the person who physically did it. Corporal discipline, I'm going to go over that because corporal punishment is not necessarily considered abuse. I'll go over that a little bit later, though. Neglect, any act or omission where a child is deprived of or allowed to be deprived of necessary supervision, food, clothing, shelter, medical treatment. If they're living in an environment when such deprivation or environment causes the child's physical or emotional health to be significantly impaired. One of the issues that we also have with neglect a lot of times is if it's a monetary issue that's causing the neglect, we usually cannot intervene. We'll provide services to them to help them get financial assistance, but otherwise there's not much we'll do. Abandonment is just as it is if a parent abandons their child. We also investigate, we're starting to take a lot more threatened harm cases where there's all of the risk factors are there for a child to be at risk of being abused or neglected. A situation like that may be a child is living in the home with a registered sexual offender. No, they haven't actually been abused, but that threat is there. These are some of the things that we investigate. We have 20 maltreatments that our hotline accepts, and these are all of them. There's abandonment, human trafficking, asphyxiation, inadequate supervision, bizarre punishment, internal injuries, bone fracture, malnutrition and dehydration, burns, medical neglect, death, mental injury, environmental hazards, physical injury, failure to protect, sexual abuse, failure to thrive, substance misuse, family violence, threatened child, and just general threatened harm. Human trafficking, that's the only maltreatment that we have that doesn't involve a caregiver. A lot of human trafficking cases are runaway teenagers. They're the perfect victims for people because no one is going to miss them. No one's going to realize that they're gone. Inadequate supervision, kind of self-explanatory. Bizarre punishment would be something like locking a child in a closet, locking them in their bedroom, tying them to a bed. Internal injuries are going to be, that's kind of self-explanatory too. Let's see. Failure to protect is a really common one, and that's one of the ones where if in this situation, that's like the omission. When you omit to take action, then that can make you responsible for abuse. Failure to thrive is when a child is underweight. There's two different types of failure to thrive. There's organic and environmental. Sometimes children have medical conditions that cause them to be underweight, and sometimes it is from their environment. Substance misuse is drug use or alcohol abuse by the parents. Family violence, threatened child would be domestic violence where a child witnesses it. We consider that abuse in the state of Florida. These are the different ways to report abuse. We have a hotline. This is the most common way we receive reports. It's 1-800-96-ABUSE. You can go through our internet website, and you can also fax in reports. So some tips for successful reporting if you guys see abuse or neglect. Obviously the victim's name and their date of birth, the alleged perpetrator's name. You guys actually, if you're working with the children, you're considered mandatory reporters. You are supposed to be leaving your name and number. The hotline is not going to turn you down if you don't. A lot of people are scared to leave their name and number. They think that the family's going to find out that they called. It's confidential. DCF's not allowed to release reporter information, but 9 out of 10 times, families know who called in the report. If they were at an event or somewhere, maybe where you guys were, and then they get the call that next morning or that evening, they can kind of narrow it down. Telephone numbers, places to locate the child, witnesses, that's always helpful for us, and any disabilities that the child could have so that we can be prepared to investigate it fully. This is confidentiality, knowing that everything is going to stay confidential in regards to reporter information. So Florida statute requires any person who has reasonable cause to suspect that child abuse is occurring is required to report it. Like, there's going to be a list of mandated reporters, and these are them, but it is also just anyone in general who suspects abuse. It's really important, I think, to report anything you guys see. I think DCF would rather have too many cases than not enough. I don't know if you guys recall recently, it was probably 6 months ago, maybe 8 months ago, there was a case in the news where a 2-year-old child was murdered and a neighbor heard the child being beat for 4 days and did not call. And if a phone call had just been made, it's very likely that that child's life could have been saved. So this is what happens after a call is made. The hotline will let you know when you make that call if it was accepted or not accepted as a report. The intake is what we call our case. It's either going to be coded 2 different ways. It's going to be an immediate response or a 24-hour response, depending on the severity of the allegations that are given. The hotline's going to call it to the county where the victim is. We're always going to go where the victim is at the time. We have some situations where a family may live in one county, but the child goes to school in the other county. It will go to the county where the child is currently located, and we'll get it to the county where they reside. The investigator, we call them CPIs, the Child Protective Investigators. They're going to gather information. They're going to look at the family's history to see if we have prior cases on them. And they're going to attempt to contact you first. That should be the first step. You guys are also able to put your concerns in writing for this child, and it can be part of our investigative file if you so choose. They're going to look for the victims. We're going to go to interview the victims first. Florida statute allows DCF to speak to children without permission from parents. Our initial place to go is going to be school. It's a neutral place for the child. It's a safe place for the child. It's a place where we may be likely to get more information if something is actually occurring. It's very hard for us to go out to a case where a child is being abused or neglected and their parents are right there with them, and then we're saying to them, come on, let me go talk to you in your room, and they're going to be terrified to tell us anything because their parents are there. We're going to interview the parents and other subjects of the report, and then we're going to use all the evidence we gather to make a finding. There's a couple different things that DCF can do. We can close our case with no findings where we found that it wasn't. Sometimes we have a misunderstanding. Some of our school staff, will be maybe a little nervous to investigate themselves. Like if they see an injury on a child and they don't feel like it's their place to ask the child what happened or to investigate it on their own, and that's okay. And so we may go out and see an injury. Most commonly it's burns. Burns look horrible. They can be so bad. You can get a burn, and then the next day it looks like a blister, especially on young, like, I kind of call it like virgin skin. Like, it's just not as damaged as ours. It doesn't have sun damage. It's not exposed. And then it's going to be a blister, and then all that skin is going to come off. I mean, it's going to just be, it's skinless. And people get really concerned and really nervous, and it could have been just as simple as a spill. But it's up to us to find that out and to determine it. So don't hesitate to make a call if you're not sure of the call. But in that case, it was just a misunderstanding. As mom turned her back, the child pulled the soup down. I mean, quick. We're not going to do anything. We're not going to implement any services. Our next step would be to implement services. We allow a family to have voluntary services. The next step would be court-ordered services. And our final step, and it's the one that we don't like to do unless it's necessary, is to remove a child from a home. If we do get to that point, we're going to want to try to place them with a relative. If there's no relative, we would try to find a neighbor, a friend, a family friend, a godparent. And if we have no one that can take the child, of course, they'll go into foster care. Okay, so discipline versus abuse. Discipline may be considered excessive or abusive when it results in any of the following or other similar injuries. Sprains or dislocations, bone or skull fractures. These are kind of going to be common sense, I think, though, for most people. Hemorrhaging to their internal organs, any kind of suffocation. If a deadly weapon is used, burns are used for discipline purposes. If there's cuts or lacerations, if there's significant, permanent, or temporary disfigurement. A bruise is temporary disfigurement. Significant is what we're looking for. I say err on the side of caution. If you see a child that has an injury from being abused, like physically abused or spanked with a belt or a switch or a shoe or a hand, it is likely that they may have had further injuries in the past. Or that injury that you see could be 4 days old, and it could have been worse before that. So kind of just err on the side of caution, but we may not take action. We may try to implement for those parents another way to discipline their children, teach them other ways, alternative methods. Loss of any body part or function or any significant bruises or welts. Sometimes we have cases where there's red marks on when maybe a child goes to school in the morning, and we could even get there that afternoon and they're gone. But we're going to take all the evidence and look at it and look at that family's history and see where we can go from there. I don't have anything else. I don't know if you guys have any questions or anything. I want to go back to this one though. So Osceola County, the way that it works here, there's one office of DCF investigators for Osceola County, and they investigate everything. There's 3 investigators in Osceola County that take the severe cases. Those 3 investigators would be the only ones that are investigating death cases, probably bone fractures and internal injuries, as well as maybe sexual abuse on young children. I think some signs to look for when you're looking for abuse or neglect would be injuries to a child, and injuries in weird places, not a skin knee or bruises on their bony prominences, but injuries in strange places. That's always concerning. Failure to thrive is a common maltreatment that we don't receive a lot, but just a really skinny child. Sometimes there's more to it than that. Sexual abuse is hard to know as well. There's different signs. We receive a lot of reports for children that are showing sexualized behaviors, children that are playing doctor with each other, if you want to so speak that way, And sometimes it's normal childhood behavior. It's normal childhood development, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes they're learning it from somewhere else. And we'll look into that and we'll try to figure it out. Do you guys have any questions or anything? Yeah.
We're going to discuss corporal punishment a little more.
That was what I did at the end.
Oh.
But I can go into it more. Do you have a specific question about it?
I must have.
Yeah, it's not, I always thought, and my personal belief was that it's not illegal to spank your child. Once you start leaving marks on your child, then other people are going to get involved. There's different cultures. We've seen cases where, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of coining. It's a common Asian practice to get, if a child is ill, they'll heat up coins and put them down the back of a child to kind of get out the sickness. It's a very kind of old school method, but it's a cultural thing, and they do that. So it's kind of educating people as to what may not be okay. The United States is a melting pot of all these different cultures, and kind of teaching them how, what the laws are here and how, an alternative maybe method to do something. So. But I kind of feel like if you are, spanking and leaving significant injuries, then we need to look at an alternative method of discipline. It's not appropriate. Any other questions or anything? Yeah.
Did you mention about how many cases are reported in the county?
I didn't. In Osceola County, I know right now they have about, I think that she has 27 investigators, and right now they have, I would say, an average of 14 to 16 cases open. Received-wise, I'm not sure. I'm more familiar with Orange County statistics just because that's where I was before. I know that Orange County, last year, I think we had 34 child deaths that we investigated, and if I had to guess in Osceola, I would say it would be maybe 2/3 of that. So, our most common death case that we receive is infant deaths that we have, the medical examiner is not able to determine the cause of death. There's not always injuries to the child. But I can say that our common denominator in most infant death cases is co-sleeping with parents. We definitely urge strongly that people don't do that. It is, in every single infant death case that we have, that is the common denominator. And it's not, we call it positional asphyxiation or overlay. It's not even that. I even think sometimes it's, maybe a baby's under a comforter and that just lack of circulation of oxygen is just not, their little lungs can't do it. So, but that's one thing that we strongly urge people don't do. Drownings, of course, in Florida are very common also. But I would say that homicides would be our next common. There's been an increase lately. I think financial stress is increasing everyone's stress level, and it's causing a lot of frustration. It's sad. It's usually younger men who are the perpetrators in that, and the most common is a shaking case where we have a baby that's shaken. And it's an instant, that's an instant decision, that ruins two lives. That young male and that baby. So report. Like, report concerns you have. I really genuinely think if you guys have a concern, it could be the chance that you could save a child's life.
And just because a report is made, those persons that are reporting are not saying, this is what we believe happened. It's just that they have a concern.
Correct. They can call either way. You can call, and if you think something occurred, you can call and report that. And our hotline they have a criteria of what they go off of to what we will accept a report for, and they'll let you know then when you call if they accepted that report or if they didn't.
Do they usually accept a lot of the reports?
Yes.
Because, you call and say I hear this child screaming over there, and somehow they don't do anything about it.
Right. We do accept a lot of reports. I think that I would say that I think last phone call that I was on was maybe 11% of the cases were not accepted. So it's quite a bit. And it's a lot. We do over 20,000 a year. It's a lot. One thing that I do want to also talk on is that we don't only do child abuse investigations, we also do what's called special conditions referrals. If you have a family that's in need of services, we'll accept that referral. The only kind of kicker is that the parent has to call. So you can be there. If you are able to encourage a parent, you can do so, but we can help them. We call it just parent needs assistance. And if they're looking for services or they're right at that brink of maybe some abuse or neglect is going to occur, if mom and dad were in a relationship and one parent leaves and the other one doesn't have child care and they're about to leave that 7-year-old home alone, we could get involved and help them get maybe low-cost daycare or some other things in order for them. We also accept reports for caregiver unavailable. That's another one of our special conditions cases. If a parent's hospitalized, if they're in a car accident, if they're incarcerated, we'll take those cases and we will try to find a place for that child that's with family or friends, or we actually have a new program right now that we just started working with the service. It's like a voluntary foster care program. So it's Christian-based, and this company will keep a child for up to 30 days while parents can get things in order. So it's an alternative for us to go to court with a parent.
Good evening. I'm David Moore, and good to see each of you. Let me just say, as we come to this, the first time I was kind of introduced to the idea that churches should have some kind of sexual abuse protection policies, it was a long time ago. It was in the 90s. It was prior to the Catholic, the big deal with the Catholic Church, with the it was before all of that. So I was like in the my third year at seminary, and every professor I went to had some great plan for my life and all kinds of ideas of ways I should affect the church when I get out there. So by the time I got to my third year, I had this kind of had this warning light that would come on in my head when the professor would begin to speak, and they would begin sharing ideas, and some of those my brain would say, man, those are great ideas. And then for the others, this light would go on in my head, and it would say, stupid idea, avoid this at any cost. And so I was in a children's ministry class, and the teacher began to talk about how we needed to have sexual abuse protection policies. And I thought, wow, that's a great idea. Do you know how hard it is to get children's workers to start with? This is it's that light starts going off. Stupid idea. And there are about 30 of us in the room. And so she asks a question. She says, how many of you have ever been in a church that has had some kind of accusation against somebody at the church in regards to sexual misconduct, and like 5 to 10 hands went up. And that light that was saying stupid idea turned off, and something else said, you need to listen to this, son, because this is important. And so for me, that's kind of when I began to get understand that this was something that was necessary. Matthew 10:16, a great verse. Jesus is talking to the disciples. He's about to send them out into the world. And you guys know this verse. You'll prove it to me in a second. Because Jesus said, I am sending you out as sheep among. Therefore be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. Guys, that's something that we need to, that's something that we can. Throughout the course of the New Testament, you find people trying to infiltrate the church, and you find people infiltrating the church throughout the course of the New Testament, and they're doing things that are. You're listening to the apostles argue against some of the things that they're teaching theologically. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just assure you, in the same as it was in the first century, there are people who come to church for other than healthy motives. Okay? And there are people who are Christians who come to church. There may not be a good reason for them to be around children or around anything else. For example, as we're starting out, just think about this. If we knew that somebody coming to church had a history of embezzling money, would we ever put them on the finance committee? Well, what if they ever did something with kids, and in the 1990s and 1980s, well, if they became a Christian later, no! Why would we ever put them somewhere, right, where they would be tempted or that there would be danger when we know they have that problem? So for this very reason, let me just say this. As we come to this, Tony and I want to why these policies are important. Then we're going to talk with you about the elements of what those policies should be.
As we start talking about the importance of making a safer place for kids here in the church, it's important for us to understand kind of the scope of the problem and the issues that we are facing as a society and in the church. But child abuse is a growing problem in our society. Would you agree with that? Mm-hmm. That it's at least an issue that we need to be concerned about. Sexual assault continues to represent one of the most rapidly growing violent crimes in America, claiming a victim every 4 seconds. Let that sink in for a minute. Claiming a victim every 4 seconds. That's a lot of people who are being hurt, who are being victimized. 1 in 5 boys will have sexual contact with an adult. Now these are age 17 and younger. But 1 in 5 boys, that's 20%, will have sexual contact with an adult. And 1 in 3 girls will have sexual contact with an adult. And this is from the resource Protecting the Gift. 1.3 million children are sexually assaulted annually. Think about that for a minute, that number. These are our lives who will never again be the same because someone didn't protect them. Children can't protect themselves. Do you agree with that? It is our God-given responsibility as adults, as parents, as church leaders to protect the children that are put in our care. We need to take that responsibility seriously. And I like to say that there's 2 ways that we often look at our responsibilities. There's the sentimental way of looking at it. That's where we think good thoughts and we say, oh, that's bad. We don't ever want that to happen. And that's just a sentimentality. But then there's the practical way. And that's where you actually do something, where you actually take intentional and strategic steps to try to make the environment that those children are in as safe as possible. It's great to have good sentiments and to think good thoughts and say, I don't ever want a child to be abused. But that doesn't go far enough. Unless we are actively taking intentional and strategic steps to make the environment for those children safer, then we're not doing enough. So that's one of the reasons that I am so glad to see so many people here tonight, because it shows that that your concern is more than just sentiment, that there's a practical intentionality about your concern for children, and that you're concerned with making the environment for these children as safe as possible. All right, Dave's going to take over for a moment.
The second reason we want you to see is that churches are becoming the targets of liability suits. There used to be a day and time in American society where if a church made a mistake and someone got hurt, the churches were kind of deemed as not really a viable target for a lawsuit. Does anybody believe that they still live in that day and time? Let me just tell you, the American Bar Association has hosted conferences on how to sue churches. And when we were putting this material together, I was working with an attorney, and he was telling me that the year before he and I started working on this in 2003, he said he gets this flyer from some attorneys, because he's in the Bar Association, so he gets this flyer from some attorneys, and it's a conference on how to sue nonprofits. Now, when he opens it up, it says in there, Wayside Baptist Church, Miami, shows the lawsuit, it shows the clippings. These lawyers sued Wayside Baptist Church in Miami, Florida for $4 million and won. So they are using newspaper clippings of their winnings against one of our Florida Baptist churches. So one of the things that we have to just recognize is this, that as a church, we may want to say that we're not of this world, but let me just tell you, the world's not going to let us just walk off. We do have to face some legal responsibilities as well. Another thing, and I think this is the most important reason, and that's this. We should be concerned because it's the right thing to do. Let me ask you this question. If you were a child and you were sexually abused by a church leader, how would it affect your views about God and the church? Okay? From where I sit, these other things are important. A church could be harmed. A child could be harmed. Child abuse is a growing problem, folks. These children that God has given to this church are this church's responsibility to protect. You are the ones to make sure that these children are raised in such a way that they feel safe in God's house. Is that right? And I've heard a lot of people through the years have said, well, but church is supposed to be a trusting place. Yes, it is. It is. Children should be able to trust the people leading them. And so that means that we have to go to great lengths to make sure that they can feel safe. Not that it's always easy for those of us who are adults, but that it's safe for kids. So, as we move in, let me just give you, I'm going to give you our outline very quickly, and then Tony and I are going to come back point by point. So if you want to have strong protection policies, and by the way, Tony and I were looking over yours over dinner this evening. You guys really have very strong policies, and we were very pleased with them. Number one, establish a process for selecting workers. Number two, properly supervise those workers. Number three, by training workers, and we have, anyway, good number of people here tonight. Number four, by developing a response plan in case something happens. Number five, by providing adequate insurance. And then number six, by creating balance. So this time, Tony's going to come up and speak with you about establishing a process for selecting workers.
Thank you. Protecting children really starts before that worker is ever in the classroom, before the situation is ever able to even be thought about. And it starts with how we select leaders that work with kids. Or not just kids, when I say kids, you have preschoolers and elementary students, but youth as well, students as well. These same policies should apply to all minors in the church. So that is a responsibility. But we need to establish an appropriate process for selecting workers. And it kind of goes to think that if you know somebody and if you've known them for a while, you should be able to trust them. But is that always true? Just because you know a person and you see them on a regular basis, do you know that you can trust them? The statistics indicate that most children who are abused, they're abused by a trusted person, somebody that they trust, and somebody that their family trusts. And many times the parents, the mother will put this, the mother and father, and I'm not saying it's their fault, I'm just saying they will put this child in a person's care because they do trust them. But we just cannot take it on surface value that just because we know somebody and that they've been part of our lives for some time, that we know everything there is to know about them and that we can completely trust them. That's why we're very careful about selecting workers. So, here's a couple of policies that we need to have in place. The first one is the 6-month rule. Has anybody heard of that? The 6-month rule? What does the 6-month rule say? Somebody tell me.
You gotta be here 6 months.
You got to be here 6 months before you work with kids. Now, what does that do? What does the 6-month rule do for us? First of all, it makes sure that we know that person. Now, is it going to guarantee that we can trust them? No, but it's going to help us. We're going to get to watch them. We're going to get to see if they have any behavioral issues or maybe violent tendencies or anger issues. So we're going to get to know them a little bit in 6 months. We're not going to get to know them really well, but we're going to get to see them and observe them for about 6 months. Also, this is the big thing about the 6-month rule. Someone who is coming into a church with less than pure motives, say it's someone who is coming as a predator or someone who is coming looking for a place where they can abuse children, is not going to stick around for 6 months. They're going to go down the street to a place where they can have immediate access to kids. And then they're going to, generally the pattern is they'll abuse and then they'll move on. They'll abuse and they'll move on. So if the church has a 6-month rule, they're going to come and they're going to, that really goes with all of these aspects. If a church has these things in place, they're going to come and say, well, that's not an easy target. I'm going to move on. We don't want them to move on. We don't want them to abuse anywhere. But we can only take responsibility for our situation and for our church and for our organization. So these policies, they kind of put a wall up and say, there's no easy pickings here. We are going to protect our kids tooth and nail. So if you're a predator, we're going to watch you. We're going to be watching you. We're going to be looking out for you. We're going to have policies in place so that there will be no easy place for you to prey on kids here. So that's why these policies are really in place. So the 6-month rule gives no immediate access to children, demonstrates the church knows the people that are working with the children. Also, we need to have a written application. So a person comes and they want to work with kids. They wait the 6-month amount of time, and during that time, maybe there are a few weeks before the 6-month period is over, and they really are looking to work with kids. We give them the written application. They need to fill out the written application so that, you want to ask basic things on that application, like, are you a Christian? We want to know that the people that are working with the kids are, absolutely. Maybe they will write out their testimony in a paragraph or two on that application. We want to know some information about them, who they are. And there'll be some standard things on that application as far as introducing some of the policies of the church that they will have to agree to in that application. So the 6-month rule, the written application, there's also the reference checks, or background checks. We want, you go to work at, just about anywhere today, you have to give a reference check. You have to do a reference check. You have to give personal references so that that employer can call and ask some questions about you. The same thing is true if you want to work with children in the church. We just want to know, basically, we want to do our due diligence and make sure that there's no reason that this person should not be working with kids. And now here's something that actually happened with me one time, is I called about somebody who was volunteering to work with kids, and they said, oh no, they'd be great with kids, but don't ever let them drive. They are the worst driver in the world. So don't ever let them drive the kids around in the bus. That's great to find out that kind of information, because they are not going to be driving the kids at the next, their next trip to camp. But I had already figured that out anyway. But David has a little testimony to share about that.
And I was going to say to you this. When I worked in a church, we put these kind of policies in place. Tony's worked in a church that has these kind of policies. In my case, over 100 interviews, and in each of those cases, I never had any background check information come back that would prevent somebody from working for me. But I did have a reference check. So that prevented somebody from being able to work for us. So you want to make sure that you don't do just a background check, but a reference check. You give them a call. And Tony's got a couple of statistics he'll share with you, or a statistic to show why.
Yes. The average child molester will victimize between 30 and 60 children before he's ever caught. That means that many of the people who have victimized children will not have had a prior criminal conviction or anything that will come up on a background check. So if you're just doing background checks, you're not doing enough. Because most, not most, but many, like I said, many people who have victimized children have not been caught for it, for whatever reason. We just had the case with the coach at Penn State. He would have passed a background check. However, he probably wouldn't pass a reference check if someone had called and talked to some people who knew about his life. And that's why it's important not just to do one of these things, or not just to do two of these things, but to do all of these things, because they interlock together to provide that barrier that we're looking for. So when you do the 6-month rule, when you do the written application, when you do the background check, you get these things. So the background check, as well as the criminal background check, as well as the reference check, is very important. So the background check is the criminal background check, and that is where you use an organization, whether it's here the FDLE, Florida Department of Law Enforcement. You can get a background check done through them, but there's also a lot of private companies as well that are very good at doing background checks, some designed specifically for churches. And the background checks, you want to make sure and do an identity verification. That's the person is who they say they are. And they do that through driver's license and Social Security. They have a way of checking that to make sure that those things are legitimate and they're not giving a fake name. And then they will do a criminal they'll check back to every county that the person has lived. And that's why that part of that written application is listing all of the places that they have lived. So they will do a check in all of those various places, all of those various counties that they've lived. And then finally, an interview. And really in many of a church is to sit down with a person, look them eye to eye, and just talk to them. Spend some time in prayer beforehand, because I think God can give us some guidance and insight. But just talk to a person and talk to them about their spiritual life. Talk to them about maybe some of the issues that they face in life and how their spiritual life is going. And you can just get a sense of where a person is. And maybe the person is not an abusive person, or they would never hurt a child, but maybe there's something spiritually that they're dealing with, that maybe they're not ready to be working with kids. Because we don't want just anybody that will come into a classroom and spend time with kids. We want people who are going to pour their life spiritually into the children that have been entrusted to us. So we want to make sure that not just that they're safe. We want more than just safe. We want people who have the ability to invest spiritually in the lives of these children. So the interview is very important for that aspect as well.
Whoops. So you saw the process of selecting workers. The next big part is supervising workers. And so just a couple of things we want to make you aware of here. The number one way to help supervise workers is a 2-adult rule. That means that we have at least 2 adults working with the children at the same time. Tony, how about, you got a story from your work. How about share with us?
Yes. A previous church where I served as a children's pastor. While I was there, I implemented with our children the 2-adult rule, which basically means that an adult cannot be alone with a minor at any time. That there has to be 2 adults with a minor. So 1 adult and 1 minor, 1 adult and a group of minors cannot be alone together. You always need 2 adults in that. And while I was at the church on staff there, whenever we had children's programs, I would not allow 1 adult to be with those children. I had to have 2 adults. I left the church some time ago, and I just got the most disturbing news recently, within about the last year. And what had happened is one of their youth leaders, in fact it was their youth minister, was arrested because he was having an illicit affair with one of the teenage girls in the youth group. And as some of the parents were talking to me and telling me about what had happened, it seemed that this was one of the leaders, that the girl was a teenage girl who was one of the leaders in the group, and she would come to the church and they would go over into the youth building together by themselves and work on projects and things like that. They weren't observing the 2 adult rule. Now, I'm not saying that this would have happened if they had observed the 2 adult rule, but if one of the leaders, if his supervisor had said, hey, look, we have a 2 adult rule at this church, and if you're not mature enough to understand why we have this rule, speaking to the pastor, then I'm going to make sure that you follow it, and if you don't, you have no place here on this staff, because it's very important for us to take those things seriously. A young adult man should not be spending time alone with a teenage girl in an unsupervised situation, even if it's somebody that we think we can trust, because we put them in a place, and at very least, where it seems and looks inappropriate. There may be nothing going on, but we're even to avoid the appearance of that which is evil, even the appearance of that which is appropriate. And now today, this young man is in prison, and he's probably going to be there for a very long time. His family, he had 2 small children, his family is destroyed. This young woman who was 14 years old, this girl, her life is in turmoil, her family's life is in turmoil, the church is in shambles, and I don't know that it could be avoided, but a lot more could have been done to protect that situation if they had followed the 2 adult rule and been committed to it. And if there was the first sign that it was being broken, somebody stepped up and said, hey, we're not going to do this. We're not going to have this. This is not going to take place here, because we're serious about protecting kids and about protecting lives in general in our church.
A friend of mine works, is a children's leader at a state convention at another state. And to go along with this 2 adult rule story, he said, so one day, the activity in the lesson guide was to trace an outline of the children. Okay? Church with 2 Sunday schools. Well, he's an experienced children's leader, so what he would do is, as he traced around them, boys and girls alike, when he got to the knee, he drew a line straight across and went down. So it looked like even the boys were wearing dresses, right, when he finished with them. But while he was there, one of the boys from another spot of the room started screaming, he touched him, he touched him. And fortunately for this worker, there was another adult in the room, and that other adult said, no, he didn't. I was watching. She happened to be the mother of the boy who was making the allegation, right? So that helped even further, and so she stopped it. But now, so then that Sunday school wrapped up. It ended, and when it was time for the second Sunday school, the next teacher walked in, and she said, don't worry about telling him, my helper's not going to be here today, but don't worry about it. I'll be just fine. And he said, no. That will not be just fine. I will stay in here with you, or we'll get somebody else. And he told her the story. But now think about his story for just a minute. What would have happened at that church if there hadn't been 2 adults in the room? Several of the boys, at least the one who was making the allegation, would have gone out in the hallway. What would have happened later on that day? Good chances that this person who works for a state convention would have been facing all kind of allegations. Their ministry may well have been ruined. The church probably, at the very least, the rumor mill around town would have been pretty rough, and there's a possibility they made the news. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2 adult rule protects the children, and it also protects you. You do not want to be left alone with children. It protects your integrity and your life as much as it does theirs. Please don't forget that. Second thing, so the 2-adult rule, make sure nobody's alone with kids. Then, in addition to that, it is good to have somebody else who supervises who the 2 adults are. I mean, I seriously had a school principal tell me once, he was coming to our church and he said, I will not put my child in the nursery because things happen in church nurseries. And I gathered by that what he was saying is that either he or a family member or a friend had been in a situation where something had happened to somebody in a church nursery. And so I said to him, he was principal down the road, I said, well, I'm pretty sure that our church nursery is at least as safe as your school, probably safer. And so I began walking down the list of things. He said, well, we background checked. I said, we background checked. We run reference checks. He said, we run reference checks. I said, we have a 6-month rule. You can't really do that. You hire a teacher. They kind of have to start working then, right? And so then we started talking. I said, now, I have 2 adults in all my rooms. Do you have 2 adults in all of yours? And he said, well, the kids will. And I said, the kids will what? Because many cases an abuser will threaten the children. Okay? And I said, now here's what I want you to know. We've got windows in all of the rooms, and I send somebody in each of the rooms. They go in randomly into the rooms. The teachers don't know when they're coming. And so here you have the situation where they don't know when somebody's going to show up. Tony had a great situation. They put cameras in all their rooms. They knew what was going on. So the idea is that in addition to a 2-adult rule, you actually watch the 2 adults also. And if you're one of the 2 adults, think about that. That is also to your advantage as well as to the kids. Okay? And then there has to be, if you're going to properly supervise, some kind of a procedure to report misconduct or abuse. In other words, if you see somebody else working with you that regularly violates the 2-adult rule, if you see somebody dealing with a child in a way that's inappropriate, you know where to go and what to do. Does that make sense? And so that's part of the proper supervision. We're going to kind of move a little faster through the next few points. So let me just stop here. Does anybody have any questions before we move on? Okay, all hearts and minds seem to be clear. Just a few other things then. The next one, training workers. And I'll put these things up here very quickly. Let me say, here's the importance of being trained. You guys are out tonight, you're being trained, and so I know that after we finish this, Mary has another element of the training as to how it's going to go. Let me just say this to you. The policies that the church has are only as good as the people who carry them out. In other words, if you've been trained to work in a 2-adult situation and you know you're by yourself and you don't say anything to anybody else, then the system breaks down. Are you with me? If you see other people who are dealing inappropriately, when it comes to handing out children on Sunday morning, the church may have a policy as to how preschoolers are released, but if the people in the room don't follow those procedures, then we have a problem. Does that make sense? So training is absolutely critical. You need to know what the policies are so that you know to follow them. You need to be able to recognize signs of abuse and neglect. You heard some of those today. You need to know proper displays of affection. I notice that is listed specifically in your policies. You need to know what appropriate methods of discipline are. Because what we really don't want is Jim Bob and whoever else sitting in a room with somebody, the kid's running laps around the wall, and finally Jim Bob says, now what did my mama do when I did this? Well, we probably don't want Jim Bob doing whatever he saw his mama doing, right, on somebody else's kid. And so what are some appropriate ways to handle methods of discipline, and what do you do if an emergency crops up? If you're in the bed baby room or you're in the toddler room and you've got 5 toddlers, 2 workers, and the fire alarm goes off, what do you do? Right? So how to handle emergencies. Training workers. The value of training is to make sure that everybody understands what their job is. And if you can do that, then the policies are more likely lived out. The more effectively you guys live out the policies, the safer the place this church is for children. Develop a response plan. And I notice also that is in your policy. I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but the whole point here is you want to have policies in place that are going to do their very best to make it difficult for anybody to harm a child. But no matter how good your policies are, nothing's perfect. So then, in those circumstances, the church needs kind of a game plan as to what to do next. And so I notice those in your policies, and I assume that that'll be part of your conversation in the next few minutes. Just what do you do in case something comes up? I thought I took all this off. All right. Number 5, provide adequate insurance. The point here is just simply that churches need to have insurance in case a staff member or a volunteer have some kind of inappropriate contact with a child. And then finally, creating balance. And I know when you go through something like this, you think, balance? We've talked about all kinds of horrible things, right? This does not, you got a bunch of rules. This really doesn't sound like balance to me. But at the same time, let me just say, it may not feel like balance because we've maybe been off on one side for far too long. Churches didn't realize the real danger that was there. So as we come back, though, I remember when I was first setting up these policies, we had a lady say, well, I guess this means we can never hug or touch the children again. We just have to kind of stand there, be sterile, and stay away from them. I said, Miss Lucy, nothing could be further from the truth. The day we stop hugging children is the day we'll close the doors and we'll go do something else. But you don't want to be in a room off by yourself with the lights turned off with nobody else around. Right? I noticed that you have some specific comments in your policies as to how to properly have, or how to have proper displays of affection with the children that will be things that parents, when they come by, aren't going to be worried about what they're seeing. So when it comes to balance, there's two sides. There's the fear side and the foolish side. The fear side is, I'm so afraid of everything I can't act any longer. And so we can go too far that way, where we actually do not minister because we're so afraid to act. But folks, for too long, the church has been on the foolish side. We've stuck our head in the sand and tried to pretend that these kind of things don't happen and that we have no responsibility. And as members of a church and as leaders in the church, we have to balance. Does that make sense? Thank you for your time tonight.